we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell for notifications so you know when our next video is going to drop. Make sure you rate and subscribe and do all that stuff, wherever you're listening. Please tell your friends about us. If you ever want to hear any specific topics, please reach out to us. You can hit us up on our Instagram. You can hit us up on our Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod. You can donate to the podcast too. Go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Like I said, there's different tiers there to support us there. So help us out and drop us a couple shekels, and we'll continue to keep making this podcast great. And there's different segments we'll do on the Patreon and stuff like that. Big Mark's book corner, things like that, book reviews and all that fun stuff, behind the scenes looks and things like that. And speaking of behind the scenes looks, I'm doing another episode on a TV show this week, as I'm sure you figured out by the title of the episode. But I was kind of thinking about when I was doing it, I'm like, you know what? I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about, why I'm, you look at the description of this podcast, we talk about sports and sports to psychedelics and much more. So, obviously entertainment and things like that kind of fall under, under that giant umbrella that I've created. But that's the thing, is that I don't want to kind of feel like I'm just getting into entertainment things or things that I think people will like and just want to hear. Again, these are the topic episodes where it's just me and you guys talking. Sorry, I just banged the microphone there for anyone not listening, that it wasn't a transformer that just walked into the room. But I kind of want to do things that I love, and movies and television are one of those things. And I think, especially in today's time with, things are getting a little bit better as far as COVID and stuff is concerned. But the last few years, there was so much uncertainty, and, we're not just going to kind of heal from that, mentally, kind of immediately. So, and I think for many people, whether you're living alone, whether you're living with somebody, I think a lot of people turn to movies and television in this time. And if anything, it's a reminder that, although we weren't really able to go to theaters and we couldn't go to concerts and we couldn't see bands, music and TV and movies and all these things were the things that actually, those were the things we turned to in our darkest times. Is we actually turned to those things that, unfortunately, have slowly become less valuable, or at least people are less willing to pay for certain things, music being pirated, streaming services. I guess you're paying for it a little bit, but the artist is getting bupkis. Movies are being stolen. It's kind of one of those things where we should be happy to pay for this entertainment. It's just that there's so much out there these days that it is tough. But again, these streaming services for movies and TV too, we're all paying subscriptions for that, so there's stuff to that. But again, remember, in these times of crisis, who we turn to, and it was the artists and the writers and all these people who created these pieces of art that we all appreciate when life is rough and we need to kind of escape a little bit, right? Another thing that I like to talk about too with these shows is I think people's imaginations have become less and less. Not on the whole, I don't want to say this as a blanket statement, but there's some people out there, and you know who you are, but there's people out there that just don't have an imagination anymore. And, it's tough. And, those are people that are just taking life too seriously. And I get it, in these times, there's not a lot of room for being silly and not taking things seriously. But at the same time, it can be used as an escape in a healthy way, obviously not to just like push things to a side and not think about anything for real. But again, that momentary escape and realize that, hey, there's more to this life than, the rough stuff that's kind of happening, right? And obviously the shows and movies and stuff that I like to do, I like to talk about and like to kind of bring forward to you guys. I try and find deeper meaning in a lot of this stuff too. And, the writers of most of these shows are very intelligent. And, it's like, it just reminds me now, if you guys haven't seen it yet, go check out the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia podcast I did a couple episodes ago. And there's a scene where Mac is talking to Dennis, and Max saying, listen, I love Die Hard, and John McClane didn't go to high school or didn't go to college, and he defeated the bad guys with street smarts. And Dennis goes, yeah, but the character was written by writers who most definitely went to college, and blah, blah, blah. And it's funny where, although some shows might be very stupid, the people who created them are quote unquote intelligent. I know obviously education doesn't mean intelligence, but they're not made by like bumbling idiots most of the time, right? So most of the time in shows, writers are creating deeper plots and meaning behind the plots, and everything, at least to them, makes sense. And there's some kind of, there's callbacks here and there, and set designers are doing things here and there too, right? So I guess I just wanted to kind of lay that out for everybody and just say, if you haven't thought about movies and television and artwork that way, take a look at it. And if you have, thank you, and continue to do what you're doing. But, take that time and look past, kind of the mundane, just like, again, Seinfeld's a perfect example. It's a show about nothing, but it's one of the biggest shows of all time because that presence, that mundane, that nothingness is actually where everything resides. I guess it's kind of more of a cosmic idea, but we'll come to that later. So this week we're talking about Parks and Rec. Like I said, great show, phenomenal writing, phenomenal acting, just the way it's put together, the way it's presented. It's a pretty interesting show in the way how it has kind of morphed and changed over the years, as every show kind of does. But I'd put it up there. There's kind of the big three of The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and Parks and Rec. They all kind of have a very similar vibe. They're all about a workplace, and each one kind of has its own flair. But each show, I won't go into extreme detail, but each show kind of has a similar vibration to it. The Office kind of standing alone in the sense where it kind of kept that whole idea of having, or at least for the most of the run of the show, having Michael kind of being like that crux of chaos and potentially the funniest on the show in the middle, and most of the characters kind of surrounding that and playing off that. And then each show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Parks and Rec coming on, which I believe at one point all of these were on TV at the same time, so they weren't all the same show. But again, we could probably draw parallels between characters all day. Anyway, that's that whole beauty and comedy that's in the mundane, in the day-to-day life, that all is kind of encompassed in those three shows. And there's probably a reason why, all those three shows are similar, is because they're basically created by the same people, or at least have a hand in creation by the same people. It was Parks and Rec was specifically created by Greg Daniels and Michael Schur, who had both worked on The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine as well. But Greg Daniels kind of his most famous show probably, I guess, would have been King of the Hill, and then he also helped create The Office. And then Michael Schur helped create The Office, and he was one of the head writers, I believe, but also he played Mose on the show as well. And then he also created The Good Place too, which is a great show. But anyway, we'll go into a little bit about the show first. And, you know, it's interesting. Like I said, you know, I had spoke about It's Always Sunny, spoke about other shows and movies and stuff in the past. I don't want to just kind of get caught up in just talking about the plot of the show. I want all these episodes to kind of be a little bit more, you know, open and, you know, talking about kind of the highlights of the show and then kind of what I think, and again, kind of wrapping it up with a nice bow at the end. But if you've never seen the show, spoiler alert, I'm sure there's going to be stuff that's going to come up that might trip you out. But if you have seen the show, it's great opportunity to check it out again. So yeah, a little bit about the show: an American political satire mockumentary sitcom. So that's a bit of a mouthful. I guess it follows that mockumentary, kind of like the same thing The Office did. You know, all those Christopher Guest movies. Just like where there's a scene and then there's like an interview kind of happening. It's a really interesting kind of setup. It's very funny. I feel like near the end of the show, they kind of went away from that a little bit more so than The Office did, where they really hung on to that to the end. It aired from April 9th, 2009 to February 24th, 2015. So it was on for 7 seasons. And the series stars Amy Poehler from SNL and many great movies as Leslie Knope, who is a perky mid-level bureaucrat in the Parks Department of Pawnee, a fictional town in Indiana. So again, that mundane kind of everyday, day-to-day thing. It's not only in just a plain paper office. It's not only a police station. It's in a government building. So, you know, it kind of came out in 2009. That's when people were kind of really interested in how the government was working. It was coming out of the recession. Everyone had a lot of questions and expected a lot of culpability and responsibility, and they wanted to see that in their government. So it was kind of funny in the way where the show plays off the ineptability, or plays off the fact that the government sucks, and then it plays off the fact that there are times where the government is doing good things for people. But we'll go into kind of the rest of the cast here. Rashida Jones, who is also on the Office, she plays Ann Perkins, who's Leslie Knope's friend. Paul Schneider is Mark Brandanowitz, which is an interesting guy, interesting character, interesting situation. I'll touch on that in a second. Mark Brandanowitz starts kind of out as Leslie's love interest in the first couple seasons. Aziz Ansari is in it. He plays Tom Haverford, he's a hilarious character. Tommy Timberlake, he's just amazing. Just really funny. Again, the side characters in the show really develop as the show kind of goes on and morph and get a lot more depth. But tremendous character. Nick Offerman is Ron Swanson, who's a great character. Probably, if we were going to compare it to The Office or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, more in your Stanley Holt type character range. Very serious, very straight, hilarious. Aubrey Plaza plays April Ludgate. She's tremendous in the show. Her boyfriend Andy Dwyer is played by Chris Pratt. Adam Scott plays Ben Wyatt, who eventually becomes Leslie's new love interest. Rob Lowe is Chris Traeger. He's tremendous. Jim O'Hare is Jerry Gergich, and Retta as Donna Meagle, and Billy Eichner as Crazy Craig, who's hilarious. So all those people, tremendous actors, tremendous characters. You know, I want to acknowledge them all in all the tremendous work they do, but again, I don't necessarily want to get into the entire eccentricities of each character. Chris Pratt's character is probably up there with one of the funniest kind of supporting actors or supporting characters in the show. You know, up there with your Kramer's, your Charlies, just crazy, outlandish, very physical comic, or comedy, very physical comedy, and just really funny one-liners. He's a very sweet character, and again, without going into everybody too deep, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about just the overarching, just kind of the way the show kind of just, made some changes. Let's just put it this way. So it's funny because it's actually, I guess there's a lot of shows that are like this, but it's a show that starts out pretty rough and morphs into one of the greatest sitcoms of all time. And it's funny. So in season 1 of the show, it basically kind of follows that Office formula of having a single outlandish boss like Michael Scott, played by Leslie, or in this case being Leslie, surrounded by relatively straight characters. So if you watch the first season, Leslie's crazy. She's kind of like manic, wild energy, and everyone around her is always kind of like, all right, like chill, and everyone's pretty calm and cool and collected around her. I don't know if it was audience feedback, from test audiences, or the writers actually kind of adjusted themselves. Many comedy shows, like in this case, I feel like the writers were aware of what was happening and maybe didn't see it being the longevity being there. Or again, potentially there's audience or producers talking about saying, listen, this isn't working right now. People aren't really digging on Leslie's vibe, whatever it was. But an interesting point Aziz Ansari made in an interview, many comedy shows actually start slow. And you kind of have to get into it. You have to get used to the characters, blah, blah, blah. And I think the audience and the writers need to kind of get comfortable with what the characters, who the characters are and what they have to say, especially for comedy, right? You can't just like laugh at anything. You have to be really comfortable with that. It's funny with like dramatic arts, if you want to call it that. Like comedy is one of those things where it's hard to do. It's way harder than drama and being really serious. Not that dramatic actors that do more serious roles aren't good. Oh my God, there's amazing actors out there that do serious roles. But to be able to do comedy, it's interesting. And there's a paradox there where a lot of those actors that do comedy, then they never get parts that are serious. Jim Carrey's a great example of someone who came from comedy and showed that they're a great dramatic actor, with The Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Again, there's aspects of comedy. The Number 23 wasn't all that funny. I don't think there was aspects of comedy there, but serious acting coming from Jim Carrey was very interesting. You don't see that happening as much, but a lot of comedic actors are great actors. And again, especially with shows, not everyone has the same sense of humor. So, if you're kind of open to it, you can kind of, accept different styles, and it doesn't click right away. The Office, the first season is hella cringy. It's supposed to be a lot more like the UK version, but that takes a little bit of time to get into. I talked about The Sopranos before. Their first season, is kind of a lot different from than what happens. Again, the first season probably is almost a lot like a band's first album. You have, essentially, for certain writers, if it's their first show, you have their entire life that they've been thinking about this show. In certain circumstances, maybe they came up with it that year or whatever. But some people have been holding on to an idea in their head, or they've been working on it for 20 years or 10 years. And finally you see that. And that's the first season of the show. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, now we have a second season. And unless your writer's like, I don't even know if this is true in Breaking Bad. It seems like they had an idea from season 1 to the last season, a general arc over the entire series, but maybe they didn't. But I feel like a lot of shows, they have no idea how many seasons they're going to be on. So they write the first season and then they keep going. So the writers of this show anyway were smart, and they really, really changed things up going into the second season. By season 2, they really mellowed out Leslie's character. They added a lot more depth to the supporting cast, like I mentioned before. They made the characters around Leslie a lot more funnier, had more interesting storylines behind them, a lot more. Andy Dwyer was not supposed to come back, and they brought him back because Chris Pratt just did such a good job. But one of the casualties was Mark Brandanowitz. Remember, I mentioned I wanted to talk about him. The thing with Mark Brandanowitz is one of the most interesting scenarios in all of TV, in my opinion. He has one of the most abrupt exits from any show I've ever seen. I mean, that's maybe not true. I've been watching Oz lately, which is a fucking wild ride, and a lot of people just fucking disappear on that show, but they're getting killed. So it actually ties it up nicely. But in this case, the character of Mark Brandanowitz was basically the remnants of a different show. He still had those first season vibes, and he was kind of a douchey character. He was a womanizer, and he kind of was no longer Leslie's love interest. He was kind of trying to get into Anne. He was into Anne, and it just, I don't know if it turned people off, or again, it just didn't fit in the new show's vibe, where again, Leslie was kind of chilled out, and Mark's character was so subdued, he just became hella boring. I don't know, I guess he was kind of always boring, but it made sense when they were kind of going with that more like Office vibe of having more of like normal people involved. And he ends up breaking up with Anne, and then is literally never heard from again. So Mark Brandanowitz, rest in peace, my man. You're a casualty of many a show, or you joined the ranks, I should say, of many characters who've been killed off shows, and yours is a wild one. And it seems like Paul Schneider, I guess the actor who played him. Sorry, let me just check. Yeah, Paul Schneider. He kind of didn't really know what happened either, but hey, sometimes when you completely alter a show's trajectory, you're going to have to snip a couple characters. At the end of season 2, the Pawnee government shuts down, and we're introduced to the auditors, like government auditors, Chris Traeger and Ben Wyatt. Essentially, Ben replaces Mark Brandanowitz as this new character, as this new love interest for Leslie, and Chris Traeger for Anne. So 2 birds stoned at once, I guess. They completely replaced Mark with 2 guys. In my opinion, way more interesting cats. Ben Wyatt's really cool. He has some hilarious parts in the show. And Chris Traeger is a very, very interesting character, very quotable, very memeable, and yeah, just again played by Rob Lowe. And he does a tremendous job. Throughout the show, there seems to be kind of an on again, off again second chance with most of the characters' relationships, which I guess is close to real life. Things sometimes don't always work out the first time, or people make mistakes, or people decide to do things that they would never think about doing, but they're, misguided or overtaken by their feelings, or, whatever that might be. And, people break up and people get back together and people do things. And it's interesting, maybe a writer on the show has kind of an unrequited love, and this is his way of kind of, reuniting things and living vicariously through his characters. But it's pretty rampant in the show. Like, I have some examples here. So Andy and Anne, on again, off again, heavy duty since the first episode, basically. Andy and April, on again, off again, because Anne gets involved. Chris and Anne, on again, off again, because Chris is whatever about like dating people, and then he moves away and move back, blah, 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 blah. Leslie and Ben, classic, on again, off again. Ron and Tammy 2. Tom and Lucy. Like, again, there's probably more, but the only people who've been together the whole time are Gail and Jerry. So, interesting. Back and forth. I just thought that was an interesting point. Also, throughout the series, Leslie continues to work on her political career. So it's actually a really interesting trajectory she takes, and it's fun. It's fun watching her start as the deputy of the Parks Department, and she slowly kind of works her way up. And she's a lifelong public servant too. She always wanted to work in the government as a little kid, and there's a lot of flashbacks in the show, and there's a lot of storylines where it talks about her love for the government, and slowly but surely you kind of watch her ascend to potentially the presidency. Anyone who's watched it know what I'm talking about. But at the end, they kind of imply that she probably became president. So very cool. She runs for governor, this whole thing. And it's funny because in season 7, they do a lot of time jumps. So it aired in 2015, but it was set in 2017. And then like the very end, there's like 4 or 5 year jumps and stuff. And Ben and Leslie have all these kids and blah, blah, blah. It's really funny. It's at one point in the show, Will Arnett, who was Amy Poehler's husband at the time, came in and was a guest on the show, and he played a character that was dating Leslie, or at least took her on a date, and he was an MRI tech, and brought her in and gave her an MRI for free. And he looks at her and he's like, "Hey, that's a good womb," or whatever. And he's like, "Yeah, you could have triplets probably first time." And she's like, "Cool, thanks." And during all these time jumps, Ben and Leslie have triplets. Again, they have a really, really cute relationship throughout the whole show. It's really funny. Another really interesting point I thought of when I was kind of doing my research, or whatever you'd like to call it. Hold on, let me take a drink here. I got my green. Anyone who's listening, I got my green glass here. Slanche. This is gonna air right before St. Paddy's Day, but you might be listening to it. Cheers, everybody. Slanche. So I like to call it the Ron Swanson effect because, again, the show aired in 2009, but I don't know if anyone kind of remembers 2010, 2012, 13, that whole time, basically the whole time I was in university, there was this whole like obsession about like bacon and like the art of manliness and growing your mustache and, all this strange kind of like hyper masculine, I guess, jocular kind of vibes. And I wouldn't like, I'm sure it's a case of, art imitates life imitates art. But the character of Ron Swanson, like I said, is very stoic, but he loves bacon. And he eats bacon like a fiend. And I don't know if it's just the fact that the people who like this show tend to be chefs or like, people in the creative business, or it was just going after that certain demographic. Bacon this, bacon underwear, bacon that, bacon. Sorry, that sounded wild. Like bacon print on your underwear, like bacon clothes with like a picture of bacon on it. Sorry, not clothing made of bacon. Although that probably existed too. Bacon weave, bacon plate, epic mealtime shit, bacon everything, the Baconator. It just was weird. And again, maybe it was just the writers also picking up on that happening and being like, Ron has to love bacon, has to put bacon on everything. So I don't know if it was just like an America kind of like, hell yeah kind of thing, like give me some bacon. But again, I just kind of felt like those dots kind of connected there, where it was like, was this character of Ron who everyone essentially loves, and he's like a serious mofo, and he really loves his bacon. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of a funny little look at things. But the way I kind of want to tie things up here, again, I mentioned it earlier, this show really embodies, that idea of the beauty in the mundane. there's something about that day-to-day thing where, like The Office, where there's so many people, there's all these characters, and just like Parks and Rec, there's all these characters that to anyone that would just be a normal person, if you went into this office to go get some permit done, in this Parks and Rec office, you wouldn't necessarily think twice about anybody. But that's everybody. That is life. We are all these people. We are everyone. Even though there's CEOs and owners of companies and conglomerations and people who run the world, there's also people who are working in an office and doing their fucking thing. And there's no difference, again, between those people, even though we see all these, there's hierarchies and there's financial differences and all that stuff. Those are only human created. And I think when we see these things on TV and movies and everything, it reminds us that, hey, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to experience the same shit. I think one of the greatest shows ever on TV was Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, where he went in and he talked to these people who are working these jobs that no one ever would think that they would want to do or they don't want to have anything to do with. And he would talk to them and I don't want to say humanize it, but again, just bring light to the fact that there's not a big difference between all of us. And, everyone is kind of a reflection of ourselves, right? And glossy covers reflect more than they reveal. And I think a lot of people that put on airs and they put on this face and they present themselves in a certain way, when you look down deep inside, we're mostly all alike. And I think that's where we can see, when we accept that fact, there's beauty in that. And that's what I think comes from these shows. That's what I think is the essence of what makes these shows great. Of course, plot lines and clever writing and jokes here and there are great. But again, just that whole idea that there's so much more, and relatability is key too. Everyone who has ever worked in a situation like this is going to go, yeah, I know someone just like Jerry. I know someone just like April, blah, blah, blah. But again, that deeper meaning of these day-to-day happenings that we all go through, everyone goes through, no matter what you're doing, that's where beauty lives. Beauty lives in the struggle. Beauty lives in the day-to-day habits and little things that we might take for granted and we might just throw away and be like, all these things happen day to day. Who cares? We're thinking about the special times only. You got to think about those special times, yes, 100%, but don't take for granted those little moments that you might never actually remember, that, what exactly happened in that time. But if you accept that there's beauty in it, you'll never forget those feelings, and you'll cultivate that, and you'll continue to bring that into every moment of your life, every experience you have in life. You will bring that aspect, and you won't be bored, and you won't go, oh, this is, what am I gonna gain from going standing in this place for an hour and a half? Whatever bums you out, whatever bores you, look into it. There's something there. There's something in there that you don't want to confront potentially, or there's something that your mind's closed off to, and if you're open to it, you can experience it fully. And if you still don't like it at the end of that, then you really don't like it, and keep going and move on. But you never know, you're going to be open to a lot more opportunity that way. So expand your mind, expand your attention, give something a chance. Yeah, look at this show, man. The first season wasn't too hot, but it comes in and it comes into its own. And it's interesting in this show, it's almost like the fifth season becomes the fourth season. My whole fourth season theory, where the fifth season has some great episodes because that first season is almost like a throwaway season. Anyway, check the show out if you've never seen it. If you've seen it again, give it a rewatch. Let me know how it goes. Check it out. Tell us in the comments, DM us. Again, hit us up on Instagram at the Bigmark Pod on Instagram. Instagram and Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast or at the Bigmark Pod. And then our Patreon is at the patreon.com/the Bigmark Pod. So you can hit us up on any of those tiers there. Send us a couple bucks. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. If it's your first time watching, go tell a friend. You know, if you tell one friend, we'll double the podcast overnight. And hit that bell. We want to make sure you know when I drop the next video. And yeah, enjoy. Tell your friends. Let us know, and go out there and treat yourself. Peace.